Okay. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Abir Kouas, and I am an intern for Africa for Palestine. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we focus on strengthening African-Palestinian relations and pushing back against apartheid Israel's infiltration and influence onto the continent of Africa. We work with solidarity groups, trade unions, political formations, and human rights organizations across the African continent who have our same spirit of progressive internationalism and commitment to standing with other oppressed peoples of the world. Today we are hosting a webinar that's a part of a series of webinars that we have been hosting that are focused on political education and talking about important topics that have to do with creating relations between Africa and Palestine. So today we are honored to be hosting a conversation about the role of the church in international solidarity, and it will be hosted by Professor Farid Essak, and our main guest is Reverend Frank Chikane. So Professor, I'm gonna hand it over to you to do a great intro for the Reverend.
Thank you very much, Abir. Good evening, Samorane, Dumelang, Goeienaand. Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers and listeners, wherever you are. Tonight, on behalf of Africa for Palestine, I have the great pleasure to be with, not in age, but a long-standing and a very old comrade, a brother and a friend of mine personally, and ours in South Africa, in the liberation struggle and the international ecumenical community. The Reverend Frank Chikane is with us. The Reverend Chikane is one of the icons of our country's liberation struggle. In the leadership of the United Democratic Front, served in government as Director General of the President's Office for 2 terms, and has been a profoundly prophetic voice in South Africa in the years when it wasn't the easiest option to be on the side of the oppressed against the apartheid regime. He wasn't only prophetic in relation to speaking the truth to apartheid, but also in terms of speaking the truth to his own religious community. Yeah, I mean, a community that on the whole was on the side, I think, of the system or of the apartheid regime. And inside that community, the Reverend Frank Chikane had his own struggles with that pain of being regarded by your own as a traitor, when the other people may have embraced you, other South Africans may embrace you as a comrade, but when your own community regards you as a traitor. And despite those personal difficulties, he came through, former Secretary General of the South African Council of Churches, as I said earlier on, went on to become Director General of the President's Office, and remains one of the prophetic voices, the major prophetic voices in the international apostolic faith community. So with that, a bit of an introduction, Comrade Reverend Frank Chikane, over to you to talk to us tonight about the role of the church in international solidarity and the struggles of the oppressed. Thank you very much. Over to you, Reverend Chikane.
Well, thank you very much, Comrade Professor. We come from very far in the struggle together, both politically and in terms of the religious sector as a site of struggle. Now, what I'm going to say about this theme, and I would like to say a few things that will be the basis for our conversation. what I'm going to say about the church, which means the Christian church, I'm definitely sure can be applied to any other religious group, because religious traditions and groups are affected in the same way and tend to behave in the same way, actually. And so I thought I must start with a background, because those who don't know much about the church wouldn't know what you're talking about. I just want to put numbers into it, and I don't take responsibility for the numbers. I use people's numbers. So I just want to say the Christian community globally, it's estimated at 2.3 billion. Now, the next group that's very large would be, Islam. Those who belong to that religion would be, they estimate 1.8 billion, and the Hindus would be estimated at some 1.2 billion. So just those three groups are a huge part of the inhabited, created reality. And so if you were thinking of it, that those three only are 2/3 of the total population of the world, if religion was progressive and revolutionary and meant to change people's lives, the world would not be what it is today. I think that's the point I want to make. Within the Christian community, more than half of that is Catholic. People don't understand that. So of the 2.3 billion, 1.3 billion is Catholic. And so the Catholic Church is the largest within the Christian community. And I would like to repeat again, if the Catholic Church would be totally progressive, would change the world, because the numbers are so huge. And the rest of the others are about 1 billion. And I would like to say that unfortunately, their expected impact, and I'm talking about the totality, based on the moral values that they actually claim, if they were applied, would be totally different in terms of the world. And I don't want to overstate that matter. Instead, of course, what happens is that the negative forces within these religious groups tend to be dominant, and therefore do not take sides with the poor and oppressed in the world. And I would like to mention a number of challenges, just to mention them because we don't have time. I would like to say that in general, religious people tend to present themselves as children of their time. It means they behave like their own society. They don't become different. Secondly, they are naturally ideologically conservative. And thirdly, they are normally captured by the dominant forces within society. And you can apply it in general. And I would like to say that, for instance, in Latin America and in Africa, and the Middle East, most of those would have been colonial religious leaders who then were leaders in part of the oppression of people in those places. I don't have time to go through it. And I would like to say that in those communities, there were struggles for liberation by the oppressed. And some of the leaders joined the oppressed. And because of that, many of the church leaders died. And I thought I will make one example of Archbishop Oscar Romero of San Salvador. Most older people will remember that he was assassinated whilst presiding on a mass in a church, killed because he took sides with people who were oppressed. And so I would like to say, having given this background, that for me, the religious community is a site of struggle. And we said so in South Africa. We had to change it. The leaders were colonial. They thought like the oppressor. We had to wage a struggle within the churches. In, for instance, the SACC, it didn't start, the South African Council of Churches didn't start as a progressive movement necessarily. It was a struggle within it that changed it. If you go to the WCC, the World Council of Churches, which represent like 351 churches in the world, and about 500 million, took sides at the beginning with the oppressor, because the people who colonized us also had the major churches coming from their countries. We had to wage a struggle, and between 1948 into the 90s, there was a radical change that was caused within the World Council of Churches. And today, it's very progressive, but it was a struggle within it. And I would like to say that the role of the church international in terms of solidarity is constrained by those elements and should be doing much more better. And I would like to end by using the Kairos document, which is well known and started in South Africa and ended up being everywhere in the world, including Palestine. They have Kairos Palestine, for instance. In the Kairos document, we had to deal with the church and say, the church consists of three different sections, people. One is the status quo ones who support the system, kill people, support the killing of people. And you see that in Palestine, there are religious people who are Zionists and use Christian Zionism to support Israel to kill people. And that's what I call a status quo type of theology. And you see a lot in South Africa of those churches who think exactly like that, who take the Bible, use it for their purposes. And I don't know which God they believe in, because I don't believe that the God I believe in, I would allow people to be brutalized in the name of God or the Bible. And so the second group is those we call church theology, those who make statements, are with you, but do nothing. So the Palestinians can be occupied for more than 50 years and they will make statements for 50 years, but do nothing. And what we require is what is called prophetic theology, which is people who see the problem, see, judge, and act. And when they see the problem, they judge and pass judgment on it. And once they finish judging, they act to change it. And so the solidarity you see within the churches, like in South Africa for Palestine, is because they have gone through this journey. In Europe, we've got a problem that the Europeans still feel guilty about what they did to the Jewish communities there. And because of that, they allow the brutality in Israel to happen. And they keep quiet when it happens because they feel guilty. Now I say, if you committed a sin before, you can't feel so guilty that you allow sin to abound. You know, I mean, you must stop sin. If you committed sin and you repent, stop it. And they don't do that. And so, but there are prophetic voices as it is in Europe now, are doing campaigns to get the European Union to apply sanctions against Israel as it threatens to annex large portions of Palestine. And South Africa has taken that stand, and many other people, even the Council of Churches in the United States, which its government does not listen to, has taken a very radical position to say, we can't justify the occupation of people and brutalize them for so many years. This must come to an end. And so I just want to say, put this church role of solidarity globally within the context of a site of struggle. That's what I would like to say. and we can talk about it.
Okay, thank you very much for that introductory comments, Reverend Chikane. So what is there to distinguish the church from other social formations? If the church is also in some ways just a product of society, what gives the church then this? So on the one hand, it goes the way status quo theology, where we fit in with the status quo and we support whatever the status quo is. So you have this on the one hand, and many of our religious communities, this is the way they go. And the same, as you of course said, applies to other religious communities as well, other than the Christian community. So what will enable us to have this prophetic impulse become more alive, and can it ever become the dominant impulse in the church?
Well, I mean, I must say that I have to be very personal about this matter because it's critical. There are people who belong to a religion because they were born there, they found themselves there, they believe anything that is said, and the traditions of that religious community, and they don't think critically and do not take seriously the God they believe in. You see, maybe I take seriously my faith. I have to say that if I believe in God and God is God, God can't behave like a human being. You know what I'm talking about? God can't, if God created everything, because that's what we believe in, it's a creation story. God created the created reality, including human beings. And so God can't take sides in between a Zulu-speaking person in South Africa and a Tsonga-speaking person. You know, I'm just making an example. God has to be above that. Once God becomes part of a tribe, then it's not God, in my view. It's an idol. And so what the church what has happened to the church over years is that it got captured and it began to create God in its own image. And I'm sure the same concept would apply to other religions, where they reduce God to a human being. God is like them and behaves like them and is brutal and kills people. And you know what I'm talking about? That's their God. So they in the Christian tradition, we say God created human beings in his image. In the image, in the English, it's a problem. It's sexist. In my language, there's no he and she of God, you know. So in the image. And what we do is to create God in our own image and reduce God to a human being. And so the God we believe in behaves like us. And that's why we get lost. Once your theology is turned around like that, you get lost because you believe everything. But if you believe in the God I believe in, who's not like me, a human being, then I had to ask God, this God, when a Christian oppressed me in South Africa, to say, God, is this the same God they believe in? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, if you are God, you can't be on the side of the oppressor. Then I had to understand that I must reread the scriptures, reinterpret them, and liberate actually the scriptures. We ended up talking about liberating the scriptures. We went further to be a little bit heretic, actually, to say we must liberate God from the oppressor. The God is captured by the oppressors. And so I think that it's really creating God in our image. That's why with the 2.3 billion Christians, we should make a difference in the world if we believe in the God I believe in. And the God I believe in, it's a God of justice. You can't practice injustice and believe in God. I think that's the best way to explain it. And many people don't think critically and ask those questions. And because I asked those questions in my church, I got suspended as a pastor for 9 years. I was the longest serving suspended pastor. Nobody has broken that record because I just could not understand that God can be on the side of the oppressed. Yeah. I think it explains it.
Yeah. Reverend Chikane, what is interesting is that, so here you were, this disowned child, this rejected child of the apostolic faith mission, and later on you rose to become the leader of that church in the country. But the curious thing then is, you know, and perhaps it's like one still wonders, was it because the status quo changed in South Africa and it became the new norm to be committed to non-racialism and to non-sexism and to be committed to, that became the new norm. So the question then still is, you know, did the church become a more just, a more conscious entity, and what can we learn from the new South Africa? Or did the church just, oh, this is the new South Africa, this is the new currency, the new language that will get us a ride on this bus, a free ride on this bus, and if it means that we must pull this irreverent Reverend Frank Chikane back and give him even the leadership role, we will do that as long as we get to fit in. And so I mean, well, I'm a bit, I'm a bit skeptical.
I must tell you that, I mean, I'm happy I lived and didn't die, you know, because I could have died. And they would not be talking about this comparison. But indeed, I mean, that struggle started like 1975 when I got involved with the church. So it's an old struggle. And I got suspended by 1980, you know. So we had 5 years of struggle. In 1980, I get suspended. But those I left there waged the struggle. I never left. I remained a member. You know, I went to their council meetings because in my church, even if they suspend you as a pastor, you still are an elder in the church. Because I wasn't suspended for sinning. I had not sinned. So they just said, you are no more a pastor. So we waged that struggle during that time until they came back to apologize in 1990. So it took 9 years for them to come back after a lot of struggle by the Black churches, you know, colored, Indian, African, and African, to use those old categories, and the white section of the church. And so that struggle reached a stage where they apologized, they reinstated me. I then became a leader of the African church. And then we negotiated with the colored Indian, and we united because the whites were not prepared to unite. So by 1993, we unite, and I become the leader of the Black church in South Africa. And the white church only came after 94. And that's where you would say the political climate and conditions would have forced them to face this reality. And we negotiated and got united in 1996. On the same year, when we came to a conference to unite, I got elected the international chair of the church because we exist in other countries. We are in, by now, we have a presence in about 35 countries in the world, 6 continents. Most of them are on the African continent, 19 of the 30 plus on the African continent. So I became a leader of the international. If I was Catholic, they would have said, you are a pope of your church, you know. And so, in a sense, my church was transformed over time. And after the unity in 96, there were huge struggles. And now it's totally united. Actually, it is the only church I know which was divided on the basis of apartheid, which united completely.
Yes.
And of course, there's still separation on the ground in terms of the congregations, because apartheid geography and spatial, construct still keeps whites in the same area and blacks in similar areas. But generally, that church has changed very radically, and it's led now by Pastor Mahlobo, who's very progressive. But it involved a struggle to change that. Like, let me make an example. 5 years ago, you couldn't talk about Palestine, Israel in my church at the top level. And recently, they now discussed it. So there is lots of change. And the leader went to visit Palestine, Israel during the visit of the churches, the church leaders, met the people, came back completely transformed and said, this can't be allowed. I think we need to accept that it's a struggle. If we don't wage that struggle, they will revert back again into a conservative mode.
Yes. So, Reverend Chikane, okay, so the one is the question of visits to Palestine and to Israel. Yeah. You go and you see. But the same mechanism is being employed. I'm not quite sure how successfully, by the Israeli government. We do know that millions of dollars are now being spent to invite local community, traditional church leaders and so on visits. So sometimes I wonder, your comments, it's not just a visit, but through whose lenses do you look at the world once you are there? And this is, of course, where prophetic and liberation theology come in. The one is reality. The other one is reality through whose eyes? So do you see it through the eyes of the powerful? It's like whites coming to South Africa Europeans coming to South Africa in the era of apartheid. Then your apartheid hosts, your other white hosts, they take you around and they give you a lovely time in the clubs in the evening, take you to Sandton, take you to all the posh areas, the beaches, and you think you've been to the most amazing country in the world. And you go back and you only sing the songs of apartheid. So many of these church leaders who go, they go with a certain orientation, they come back and they don't see what you have seen. They don't see what your current church leader has seen. So what can we do on the ground to shift this and to get people to look at things through the eyes of through the glasses, through the lenses of a theology that liberates?
Well, one of our greatest challenge is that our faith is based on our scriptures, is based on the history of people in the Middle East. I think we should accept that, and most of the major religions would refer to that history in that space. And from Babylon, up to Nazareth and etc. If you take the whole Iraq, I always tell people to say, by the way, Babylon, it's in Iraq. They read it in the Bible and they think it's in Israel. I say, no, it's not in the current Israel. Nineveh you read about, it's not in the current Israel, it's in Iraq, north of Iraq there. The Tigris River we read about in the Bible, it's in Iraq. People they don't understand it in that way. So because our history is attached to Israel and, etc., what then happens is that people read the current Israel as the Israel of old. And that's where Zionism comes in, Christian Zionism. And they go to Israel, Palestine, I want to say, because it's a lie to say they are visiting Israel, the Holy Land. I always say, they say they are going to Israel, but they end up in Bethlehem. And I say, but Bethlehem is not Israel. And East Jerusalem, that's where the holy parts of our history come from. I mean, it's not Israel. It has been occupied, but they don't get told. So there's a huge industry that moves people. They even pay you. They say you'll go free of charge if you organize 40 people to go and visit Israel. And in the list, they then include Bethlehem and other places. So I say, but that's not a visit to Israel. It's a visit to the Middle East. Or then you must say Palestine, Israel, if you want to do that. And so, but the Israelis have captured that market, and it's sponsored. I mean, I'm amazed actually. It used to only touch the conservative churches, but now it even goes to what you'd call the classical ecumenical, the Catholics, Methodists, Anglicans, Lutherans. In the past, it used to be the more evangelical, you know. So visiting Israel for them, it's part of their, it's almost their Mecca. You know what I'm talking about? It's almost their Mecca there. But then the reactionary forces use exactly that to make sure that they visit there and they say it's Israel as if it's the Israel of old, and go and visit the Holy Land sites and come back. And what we are saying, because the first visit I did was 1988, I was General Secretary of the Council. I said, if I go there, I want to go on both sides of the division, you know, on what is called Israel and what is called Palestine. I want to do that. And I want to see the leadership on both sides. You know, I was General Secretary. And I went there and did exactly that, and went to the refugee camps. I said, I want to go to the refugee camps. I want to go through the Jordan border. You know what I mean? The way, not land in Tel Aviv, go to Jordan and go through the checkpoint and see what happens there. And then we then decided, because that exposure was critical for me, we decided nobody must visit what is called Israel, which is not Israel, because it's a broader, without being exposed to the people who are oppressed and victims. If you go there and you don't meet the oppressed, then you've not visited the Holy Land. Because I went and stayed in Bethlehem, and I mean, I went to church in Bethlehem. After church, I had lunch with one of the members of that church, who said to me, you know, I'm 48 years old. It was 2015. I'm 48 years old. And I was born occupied. I'm still occupied. And I'm going to die occupied. If you don't go and listen to people like those, you'll be lost. And that's why, even when I went in 2015, we said we must check who takes you from South Africa there, which is the travel agent in Jordan that will take us through to, you know, Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, West Jerusalem, and in Bethlehem. And we made sure that it's Palestinians who are involved in this industry who hosted us. You see, it's very important. Otherwise, you get lost. And that's why the church is being hoodwinked to think that they are doing a religious thing by visiting holy sites, when in fact they are being organized to support Israel.
But, you know, in many ways, Reverend Chikane, I'm reminded about you will know this Eshel Ruedi and the Information Gate scandal in apartheid South Africa, where they invested millions of dollars or rands in creating newspapers, in creating front companies, in creating the tourist operations, media companies, and created even alternative structures abroad and so on, with the intention of, and the Israeli government is currently busy with this, inside the Christian community, and of course inside South Africa also. What do you say to, to local pastors and to local ministers who say, but they are offering us something? Sometimes they even offer, say, agricultural projects. They offer, and of course, behind the scenes, you could get a significant per diem for your visit. And you are the pastor in a rural area, small, poor community, you, especially in the alternative African independent churches. They're searching for recognition. They're searching for a space within the larger family of the more established churches and so on. And that is why very often, you know, when in South Africa you have statements in support of, say, currently, you know, the statements in support of Chief Justice Mogoeng. These statements are often signed by these small, insignificant little outfits and people who've kind of, you know, self-made, but they are attracted to this. Of course, they're being unashamedly used by the Friends of Israel inside South Africa, unashamedly. They're being paid, they're being used to lend their names and so on. And when you look them up, you see there's no community, there's no legitimacy attached to these people. But at the same time, many of those people, Comrade Frank, they operate on the ground. And that is sometimes where our own leadership, our own pastors, our own structures aren't really present. What do we do about this?
Yeah, no, I must say that, I mean, the Israelis have invested a lot of money on this project. And it's not only them, but the network internationally that supports them. I mean, if you take the African continent, for instance, I mean, they've swept over the leadership of the continent. You know, they've gone there, offered projects, money, and got many African leaders shifting to support Israel instead of being on the side of the Palestinians. Even at the AU level, it's no more easy to just do a resolution on, you know, Palestine in the manner in which we would have done in the past. So they've done a lot of work. They've infiltrated the churches in South Africa. They've got, you know, what they call Christian Embassy South Africa. They reach out to the leadership of the churches. They even support them, you know. And so the failure of the churches is to make an assumption that this is so backward that we don't have to worry about it. You know what I'm talking about? They don't even teach about it in their congregations. But those who are campaigning are reaching out to the members. And I remember when we did this, you know, the campaign on annexation, and we said we want to have a billboard. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Hello? Silent. We're trying to sort out this problem with the sound, Comrade Frank, or if you're not listening to other members of the audience, we're trying to sort this out. We've just lost the Reverend Frank Chikane at the moment. We'll be back with you shortly. In the meanwhile, I'm getting ready to ask him about what does he think is the way forward in terms of, because it is quite clear that that on the one hand, the Israelis are scoring. They've muddied the water a lot on the African continent. And on the other hand, with international forces such as Black Lives Matter and such as the universal kind of just disgust with the way the United States is going around in the world, I mean, it is quite evident that it is a matter of time. I mean, I don't want to speak about these autocratic regimes and how they've responded to COVID, but it is just a matter of time before the United States and its ally or its child, Israel, lose legitimacy inside the larger communities, such as the continent of Africa, when people begin to see, you know, that wait, it's now another kind of colonialism that is being inflicted upon us. So we're having with us then, for those of you who are just joining us, the Reverend Frank Chikane. He was the leader of the Church of the Apostolic Faith Mission inside South Africa. So we try to see if we can get back. If we don't get back, then we'll probably just have to wind it up. As it is, we just have about another 3 minutes in any case to go. So with various measures of success, I think, but even these attempts of the Israelis have been on the back of the emergence of a very strong boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement inside the world in the last 12, nearly 13 years now. And I think it's important to bear in mind that apartheid South Africa, it was in the last 10 years that it hit the headlines of the world in a major way. But before that, a lot of groundwork was done all over the place, was done in order to ensure that we reach the point where the world recognized apartheid as the evil that it was, and it became kind of sexy for people to declare that they are against apartheid. We're not nearly at that stage yet, I think, in relation to Israel, but it is inevitable that the cards that the Israeli regime is playing, the anti-Semitic card, for example, that to be against the contemporary political 1948 established state of Israel means that you are automatically against the Jewish people. So that's a very valuable card that they have. But because Israel has consistently and is doing so in a more brash manner, linking the question of anti-Semitism to white privilege. And with the fall of white privilege, that call will also, or that kind of a game that they're playing, will also have to come to an end. This is not to say, of course, I mean, all of us, when we fight for Palestinians, we're also opposing all forms of discrimination, whether this is discrimination against Jews in the form of anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or xenophobia, all forms of racism and discrimination. I mean, this in our quest to create a more just world for all human beings and our co-inhabitants of the earth, the non-humans. So since we've lost Frank Chikane, let me take this opportunity then to wind this up. He's back with us. Frank, if you can hear me, if you can just conclude for us with a few closing words, and then we'll say bye-bye to our listeners, and sorry that we missed you.
Yeah, no, the other gadget switched off. I had to go to my cell phone. But in any way, thank you very much for the opportunity to share these experiences. I just want to summarize by saying those who are people of faith must ask the question in which God they believe. And God can never be a God who oppresses people or supports people who oppress others or kill others. God can't be God who takes sides with Israel against the Palestinians. It can't be God. That can only be an idol. God will worry about everybody. And the only way to explain it when I was there was the people who are brutalized in Palestine are victims. but those who victimize them become dehumanized themselves. So you can't be okay. So God is concerned with about both the oppressed and the oppressor, because to oppress people, you have to be inhuman and not be what God wants you to be. And that, to me, is what is critical in terms of our faith.
Thank you very much, Reverend Frank Chikane, for being with us. On behalf of Africa for Palestine, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all our viewers. And we pray that God abides with you, Comrade Frank Chikane. Our country needs you, our people need you. Your own faith community across the globe needs you. And so the Palestinians also need the voices such as yours. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your listeners.